The master page in InDesign is really an important thing, especially to keep consistency through your document. It allows you to add some structure. I'm going to go to the Pages panel here and just click on this. Now you'll notice that there's sort of a line here. Above that is the master pages. Master pages are kind of like pre-printed paper for the rest of your document. Anything you put on the master page will appear on all your document pages. So the first thing, let's click where it says A Master. And this is important. You want to see the word A Master highlighted here. And you want to see this page blue. That means it's highlighted. You're working on the master page now. So the first thing we'll do here is add some basic structure. So I'm going to go under Layout, Margins and Columns. Now you can make any change you want here. You can change, this will change the margins and it will actually add columns. So the first thing I'll do is click on Columns. Make sure that Preview is checked here. Quite often, if it's the first time you've used InDesign, it isn't. So make sure it's checked. I'm not sure when you would not want to use preview, but ask Adobe. Under columns here, I'm just going to click and let's say I'll start with 4 columns here. This controls the pink margins around the outside here. If I want to have one margin a little bit wider than the others, basically if this little chain is here, that when I change the margins, you can see it's changing them all at the same time. If I click on this little chain and break it, that means that I can actually change each margin individually. I'm going to, in this case, make my top margin a little bit wider because I want to add a running header that tells you what's on, a little bit about a running header that describes the report and has the same, is uniform from page to page. I'm always also going to add a graphic element. So I'll click OK here. The other place you can go to get some structure is under Layout, Create Guides. Again, make sure Preview is checked. Make sure you're fitting guides to margin, not page. And when I click here on rows, you'll notice that as I click a number of rows, it's adding horizontal divisions here. If you decide to change and want different ruler guides here, remember you can click Remove Existing Guides and it'll remove the ones you've already got in there and add different ones. You want to do that if you decide you wanted to have, say, 5 rows after all and not 4. Under columns here, you don't need to change that here because you've already put columns under the Layout, Margins and Columns box. A couple of other things I want to do here. I'm going to add basically a graphic element. I want a little band of color running along the top. So what I'm going to do, and again, if you've used Illustrator, you'll know that we have drawing tools. They're a little bit more basic than they are at Illustrator. But I just want to quickly talk about the drawing tools. You have geometric drawing tools here. If you used Illustrator, you also have the pen tool, which we're not going to use. I'm just going to go to the rectangle tool. And I'm going to click and drag and create a rectangle along the top here. And I just want to make that into a band of color. So I'm going to go to my color panel here. And I'm going to, you'll notice that it's acting on the fill right now. And the stroke is behind. I'm going to click on this little bent arrow. So now that it has a black stroke and a black fill and no stroke. And then I'm going to go to my little options here. My color mode is RGB. Again, when you're working with screen documents that are designed to be viewed on screen, the color mode is RGB, and I'm going to pick kind of a bluey and dark bluey green here. And I'm going to make it a little bit darker. Maybe not that dark. You'll find that it's a little bit weird trying to think in RGB after you used to working in CMYK. And I've got kind of a dark green band here. Now, to maintain consistency in your document, if you have a color that you think you might use in more than one place, add it to your swatches panel. So I've got this dark green as my foreground color. If I click on this little flyout menu here, one of the options is New Color Swatch. I can leave it on Name with Color Value, or I can change the color. If I uncheck that, I can call it dark green or whatever. It's got the RGB values here. It's got the hex color here. When I click Add, it becomes part of my swatches panel. This is a really good strategy if there are colors that you want to use throughout your document, because once they're stored in your swatches panel, you don't have to go, what color was that again? They're all right there. If I want to add some text to my master page, I'm going to click on the text tool. And in InDesign is what's called a frame-based program. Everything you do in InDesign is in a frame. Images that you place, text, any text that you put in, unlike Illustrator where you have point text, InDesign you have to have a frame. So I'm going to click and drag and create a frame here. You'll notice that text comes up here, and I'm just going to call this my report because I'm not very imaginative with titles, but I want to use this as a running header here. The first thing I probably want to do is change the typeface. So the default typeface is one called Minion. That's Illustrator or InDesign's default typeface. I'm going to change it to one called Myriad Pro. Now, a couple of things to look out for when you're using type on screen is that you want to have it fairly big, and you also don't want a typeface like Bodoni or Myriad that has very thick and thin elements, because the thin parts can be if someone's looking at a really bright screen, can actually be blown out by the screen and make it less legible. Myriad is good because it's not terribly thick and thin. And I need to change the size. So you can change the size here in the control strip. There are other panels that you can use that'll give you more type options, but in this case, I just want to change the type size. And I want to change the type color. So I'm going to click on white here. Yeah, where is my type? And I'll just click this up here, and you'll see why I do this in a minute. And one other thing that is handy is that you can add other guides. So if I want a guideline just to make sure that this is lining up with the edge of my grid there, I can click on the ruler and pull out a guideline. You can see there is now a guideline there, and I can line my running header up with that. I can also pull them out off the top if I want. To get rid of any guides, just highlight them. You'll notice that when they're not selected, they're kind of a pale turquoisey color. When you highlight them, they get a little bit darker blue. So when I click on this to select it, it turns a little darker blue, and then I can just hit delete on my keyboard or backspace if you're on a PC, and it's gone.